Welcome to Freshwater Wetlands, Habitats of Change. My name is Kayla Clark. I coordinate the public programs for UGA Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant. So as an organization, we hope to contribute to healthy coastal ecosystems and economies through research, education, and outreach. And one of the really exciting and fun ways that we do that is through citizen science or through engaging the public and volunteering to monitor wetlands and other habitats along the coast. So I'm really excited that you're going to get to talk with Luke Robertson, who is the Adopt a Wetland Coordinator and who manages one of our citizen science programs and who is actually in the field today to show you one of our wetlands here on Skidaway Island. But before we get started, just a few tips to keep Zoom running smoothly. I'd like to introduce you to some of my colleagues who will be helping it work behind the scenes. So Isaiah and Isaac will be our videographers, and Natalia will be helping to moderate. One of the things that Natalia is going to do is to keep everyone's videos off. So just a friendly reminder to keep your videos off. We do have everyone muted. However, we do still really want to hear your questions, and Luke is going to have some questions for you and ask for some of your observations and feedback. So the way that you can interact with us is through our chat box. You can find the chat box either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your device, and you'll actually see the word chat and it'll look like a little word bubble. If you don't see the word chat, look for the word more or 3 little dots. If you click on that, you should get the option, a drop-down menu with the option to select chat. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Luke to get us started. And actually, one last thing before we go, I do want to, just a disclaimer that this is our first program completely in the field. And when we did our test run, our Wi-Fi was working great. Today, it's a little bit foggy and humid. So if our video gets a little bit choppy or frozen, just hang in there with us while we get it up and working, because we really did want you to have a chance to get to see the actual wetland rather than pictures or pre-recorded video. So now I'm going to throw the ball over to Luke to get us started.
Morning, everyone. I'm Luke Robertson. I'm the Adopt a Wetland Coordinator here at UGA Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant. And my program is built around our volunteer water quality monitoring. And I go out to a lot of communities, schools, business groups, and things like that to teach them about water quality issues on the coast. And then I train them to become water quality stewards and let them go out with equipment to sample their water quality around the rivers, streams, and wetlands in their neck of the woods. Today, I'm going to talk to you about several different wetlands on the coast here that we have in our campus. Wetlands are an interface between land and water. I mean, wetlands are just simply that, water or land that is wet some time of the year. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of how what makes them special, what makes them different, and we're going to show you kind of where we are right now. So Kayla, if you can bring up the slide that kind of gives a little overview of where we are in relation to the aquarium. Okay, you should be seeing that now. So you can see we're just about 3/4 of a mile southwest of the aquarium. And you can see, actually, if you look on Google Maps, you can see kind of a bright green dot, and that's just off to my right here. So you can actually see this freshwater wetland from space, which is pretty cool to think about. We have a very close by brackish wetland. Kayla, can you go and bring that slide up to show exactly how close those two wetlands are together? All right, you should be seeing it now. And you see exactly how close those wetlands are. So as you might imagine, a freshwater and a brackish, kind of more saltwater areas right next to each other, they tend to influence one another. So we'll talk about that in the future here. And we'll move, and we'll actually walk from this ephemeral or seasonal wetland over to our freshwater wetland, and then go check out the brackish wetland here in a second. But to give you an idea of how many different kinds of wetlands are, we'll start it with a quiz. So, Kayla, can you bring up that quiz? And you can go and introduce kind of like what the wording is there.
Absolutely. So you should see a green box pop up on your screen. And the question is, which one of these words is not a wetland? Is it hocusin, fen, swamp, bog, or meringue? If you're not 100% sure, that's okay. Go ahead and take a wild guess. We just want to get a sense of what folks are thinking. I can see results coming in. kind of across the board. Awesome. Thank you to those of you that have voted. We'll leave it open for just a few more seconds. And again, your options are, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correct. Luke will correct me in a second if not, but Pocosin, fen, swamp, bog, or meringue. All right, last chance, last couple of seconds to get your votes in. And we are going to go ahead and end polling and share results. So it looks like the 3 words that people did not think were wetlands were Pocosin, fen, and meringue, with Pocosin being the top one. 4 people did not think it was a wetland.
Thanks, Kayla. You actually did pronounce it perfectly. Pocosin however, Pocosin is a wetland. It's a wetland that we find a lot of them are in North Carolina. They have very deep acidic soils. And a fen is also another wetland that sometimes you'll see associated with Pocosins. And a bog, swamp, everybody knows those usually. Meringue is the correct answer. Meringue is a delicious dessert you can use made from the egg whites. You can put it in cookies. Have you ever had a lemon meringue pie? Or if you haven't, you're missing out. That's really, really good. So meringue is not a wetland. It's actually very tasty. You wouldn't want to drink or eat anything in here most times. And I'm going to introduce you kind of to our first wetland. We're talking about today. We're going to start with our ephemeral wetland, our seasonal wetland today. Then we'll go on to, like I said earlier, the freshwater wetland. We'll do a dip net to see, maybe we'll find some critters that might be living underneath the surface of the water. If we see any really cool birds or anything, we'll point them out to you. The other day we saw tons of Gulf fritillaries. There's a great egret hiding in there right now. And then we're going to go move down to our saltwater brackish marsh and show you exactly how different it is, both species-wise and just kind of layout-wise. We'll talk about the human impacts that we'll see. We'll actually see physical human alterations to the land that have changed these wetlands, and then we'll talk more about the human impact of these wetlands over time. So let's get started with our seasonal wetland here. This is actually a giant tree that fell over a while back. You can see exactly how thin the roots are right behind me here. There wasn't much soil or roots holding this together, so eventually tipped over because it was so big, and you'll see it as we go when we move over to a freshwater wetland. But this is an example of one of these seasonal wetlands. This water that's right here, these things usually are only here during the springtime, and that springtime is spring break for amphibians to pounce on these areas. Because they're so small and they don't stay watered all year round, they don't have very many predators. So fish can't really colonize here, so they're not going to eat all the eggs of salamanders and frogs and anything else that might be in here. So there's a tremendous amount of energy that goes in these areas every spring. And sometimes you'll see them with the fall, also with those fall rains, you'll see these kind of fill up and they get pounced on by all sorts of critters. And then as it dries up, everybody kind of moves out. And that energy, now these frogs and other amphibians are now moving along the upland. And that's when they are used for food for raccoons, possums, egrets, herons, you name it. So it's a really important feature of this landscape that we have here on Skidaway. And there's a couple others around, and you might just see one walking through the woods, especially if you're walking through the woods in springtime. You might see a few of these seasonal wetlands. You might hear them. You'll definitely hear them during the evening hours when all the frogs and toads are going crazy. So, Kayla, to kind of illustrate some of the amphibians that might be found in these wetlands, could you show our next slide?
Yes, and it should be up now.
All right, perfect. So the first one you might see on that top left is one that you'll probably never see in real life. It's called a two-toed amphiuma. And you might be saying, like, a two-toed what? They're really cool amphibians. Some people even mistake them for an eel, but they're actually they're usually burrowed under, kind of in the mud. They're found. We've seen samples found near Hilton Head Island, but they can grow to almost 4 feet in length. They're very dark brown or very dark black. They have 2 toes on these little bitty arms, both on the arms and legs. So they have 2 arms, 2 legs, and they most people mistake them for eels because these arms and legs are so tiny. But they're something that you might not want to come across because apparently their bite is very vicious. They have a very mean bite. Most salamanders you come across are very friendly and cute. And one of the neatest things about amphiumas, they've actually been known to whistle when they're agitated. I've never heard of any amphibian yelling at me other than a frog, and definitely not a salamander. But amphiumas apparently will whistle, which is pretty mind-blowing to me. The other ones that you see on the list are slimy salamanders, which to their name, they are very, very slimy. If you ever pick one up, you'll definitely know that you found one. And then marble salamanders, which are chunky guys who are really cool to find, very cute. And then we talk about our frogs that we have on the list. We have narrowmouth toads, which are some of my favorite. If you ever come out after a big rain, I know near my neighborhood on Whitmarsh Island after big rains in the morning or in the evenings, you'll hear the drains just call with tons of them. And they're one of my favorites because they have a very unique call. It sounds like the bleating of a sheep. So if you're wondering why a sheep is somehow in one of these drain pools, you'll realize it's actually a narrowmouth toad. So like so it's awesome. I love hearing them call. And then we also have on the list the bullfrogs, which you hear the kind of drum of them at night, and the squirrel tree frogs. And of course, this is a very small list of the countless amphibians, salamanders and toads and frogs that are found in these areas. So if you ever come to visit one of these places at dusk, you can just, if you have your ears on and have like a cool key of all the calls, you'll get a real treat to see what might be living in these areas. Let's see. And then I think we're ready to move on to our freshwater wetland. And I want to talk about, as we walk over there, we'll talk more about kind of the benefits of these freshwater wetlands. And we'll kind of just make our way over there, and you'll see how dramatically different this little ephemeral pond is compared to our freshwater pond. Okay? If you just follow me, I'll take it slow.
While you all are walking over, just one last reminder for folks that you'll want to be in presenter view so that now that we've stopped share screen, that way you'll see Luke as the largest video on your screen. So in the upper right-hand corner, if you see the word presenter view, or if you see one big box with little squares, you're going to want to click on that so that Luke is the largest image. If you see the words gallery view or a set of 9 little squares in a cube, then you don't have to do anything. You're already there. So sorry to interrupt, but I want to make sure everyone can see the best image possible. And we're going to throw it back over to you, Luke.
All right. Thanks so much, Kayla. All right. We're going to walk a little bit over here. You can see that this is really close by. And if you remember from seeing the map view, or if you ever get a chance to look at your Google Maps and look at the campus nearby, you'll see exactly how green this is. I'm going to try to be kind of quiet because there is a great egret kind of walking out here. I have my big mud boots on, so it's hard for me to sneak around. But you'll notice how green this is. And the reason why it's so green is because this is duckweed. Duckweed often covers these kind of ponds and marshes, and it provides cover, shade to cool, kind of regulate the temperature of the water. It provides a lot of habitat and kind of hiding places for the critters that live out here. It's also very salt water sensitive. So you won't find this kind of duckweed, especially this kind of coverage, in an area that's very salty. So when you look at these kind of areas, oh, there goes our great egret. I was talking too loud. And I'm going to get a little closer here. So I'll show you one of the instruments to test out the water quality here. I actually brought a YSI. While I'm getting this started, I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of these wetlands. The wetlands like this freshwater wetland, the ephemeral wetland we saw earlier, and saltwater wetlands have tons of benefits for both us, humans, our economy, and the ecology of the surrounding area. So wetlands act as a sponge for pollutants. They really are able to pull in a lot of these the kind of the bad pollutants that we put into the watershed. They are filters for a lot of things like fertilizers. They're one of the big reasons why, and along with our tides, that we don't have very big algae blooms here in Georgia. They help regulate that kind of fluctuations of fertilizers going into our lower rivers. They are also great buffers for floods. So when we have our hurricanes and things like that, if we didn't have our wetlands acting as that buffer, we would see much more dramatic and much more destructive flooding without them. So these wetlands serve very many purposes. And in addition, also, if you come out here and you want to see some birds, this is a great place to go. It's right off an access road here on campus. But if you go to a place called Priest Landing, which is not just a few miles down the road from our campus on the Skidaway Island, there's a really, really big freshwater pond right next to the Wilmington River, and it is chock full of birds. Last time we were there, we saw roseate spoonbills, great egrets, great blue herons, you name it. So it's really a great place to go and kind of hide in those little nooks and crannies and get your bird list made up. These wetlands are also really important for carbon sequestration. So they're pulling in carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis and incorporating into the ground here in this organic material that we see below us. So they are one of the best carbon sinks. They hold that carbon in, keeping it one of our greenhouse gases from getting into the atmosphere and making climate change and global warming much more dramatic. So these freshwater wetlands really are protecting us in several different ways, and they're really been a benefit to our community, our ecosystem. For a long time, people thought of these as wasted land, thought that wetlands these could be developed or turned into agriculture, and they often have been in the past. I think nowadays people are seeing more of the benefits of these areas and seeing exactly the different ways we can benefit our communities through these things. So, as I said, because we have this duckweed right here, it's showing us that it's pretty fresh water, but we are very, very close to the very saltwater or a very brackish river. The Skidaway River is only a few hundred yards behind me. So I'm going to drop this instrument in. This instrument's called, the brand name is YSI, and it is a instrument that allows us to test different water quality metrics. So we can look at temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, and salinity. Today I'm going to focus on mostly just salinity, because that's what we are talking about today. After you might imagine that after a big rain, this might become fresher and fresher. We get a lot of rain happened last night. Yesterday when we sampled it, it was about 6 parts per thousand. Now, to give that some context, if you were salinity is measured in parts per thousand from 0 to 35, 0 being fresh tap water, just as you can take a drink of it. 35 being open ocean water. If we were to go out to the Skidaway River right now and take a sample, we'd probably get an answer around like 20, 22. We're really pretty close to the ocean here. Here, we found it very low. So about a little under 6, about 5.8 right now. We can also see the temperature here is fairly cool, probably because of the rainwater we had last night, 76 degrees. So not too chilly yet. I'm hoping it cools down soon. I think we're all ready for fall here. But that kind of gives you an indication of what the salinity might be here. And we'll go check our brackish water, and you'll be kind of surprised, I think, at the answers we get, especially with the rain. We'll get to it here in just a second. Okay, and also I want to use a dip net here to check and to show you a little bit of what might be living in over here, and give you a closer look at this duckweed. So let's see what I can get. Occasionally I get some critters in here too. And let's see. So I didn't get any fish this time. I don't think I'm going to try one more time. But you see the duckweed is these little bitty things, but there's tons of organic material, all these sticks and leaves that come in here and are food for lots of macroinvertebrates, like insects that chew up on these things. Oh, and I did find a little mosquito fish right there. So I don't know if you can see him very well. He's there. He's flipping around now. He's going to move around a bit. So that is a mosquito fish, and the people used to introduce these a lot into these ponds, thinking that they would eat all the mosquitoes. However, it turns out that they like to eat other fish larvae a lot more than they eat mosquitoes. So it's been kind of an unfortunate introduction. They're very aggressive. but because they're in here, you know that they're probably eating a lot of these, the amphibian eggs, things that would thrive in our seasonal ephemeral wetland. And so we'll probably see even more of those mosquito fish as we go to our brackish wetland just down the way. Okay, Kayla, I think we're gonna go walk over to our saltwater wetland. I think we wanted to talk about. Before we go over there, I wanted to do one more little quiz, just kind of a recap, and see what you've learned over this first part. Let's see the benefits. See if you know some of the benefits I've gone over of wetlands in Georgia. Kayla, can you bring that up?
Yes. So I just typed that into the chat box. So go ahead and let us know in the chat box why you think wetlands are important, what some of those benefits are, and we'll share those back with Luke.
Thanks so much, Kayla. Yeah, there's really, you see a lot of stuff around here. As you can see with the rains we've had recently, some of the other cool stuff that you'll see, you saw this big tree go down. You see a lot of this resurrection fern that's growing up on the branches of this old oak. They're bright green right now. You'll see them die back. They look like they're dead when in the middle of summer. And any kind of rain that comes back will bring them back again, just as they were never gone. So that's why they call the resurrection ferns, you might imagine. We have some more wax myrtles here, pretty common throughout here. And I'm looking forward to showing you some of the more the different things that live out in the brackish water. But you can see this area is extremely diverse. You can see lots of different plants going through here, and a lot of animals take advantage of this habitat too. Kayla, what we got?
So some people said exactly what you just said in terms of diversity. People said species, habitat, and diversity. Several people said it was a CO2 sink. One person said that wetlands filter water and they also give animals habitat. They help the environment with global warming, food for insects, reptiles, reduce flooding, flood control, and again, serves as filters. So lots of really great answers from our audience. That's incredible.
Well, you guys are doing great. You definitely are going to be making some excellent marsh ecologists. Okay, well, we're going to thank you so much for that. Kayla, I want to see if anybody had any questions before we move over to our brackish marsh, and I'll hand it over to you after we do those.
Sounds great. So if anyone has questions, go ahead and enter those in the chat box now, and we can share those with Luke while he's still in front of the freshwater wetland. Or if you have any observations of what you're noticing behind Luke in this habitat right now.
Yeah, there's a lot to find here. I mean, that's one of the things I do love about this area is that there are so many species taking advantage of this habitat.
Luke, we had one question about whether or not the wetland gets bigger when it rains.
That's an excellent question. That's to see if it gets bigger when it rains. I would think that this does shrink and expand during really wetter parts of the year. So it'd be interesting to come here during the spring and see what this is like. There are some drains around here which probably regulate the level of water here. And then if we ever have big hurricanes, that drop tons of water, or say in the case of the freshwater wetlands over on Priest, if we have a really dramatic hurricane, then we can see saltwater come over the top, which would definitely influence the levels. Some of these, because there's been so much human involved influence in these, these here are probably pretty well regulated. I mentioned the ones over in Priest Landing, they can get higher and lower, but they're U.S. Fish and Wildlife, when they used to own that land, put in drains. So once it gets so high, there's a couple pipes that will drain it into the Wilmington River. So there is a pipe, but it's a very big wetland. If you take a look at Google Maps, you'll see that wetland is probably 2 or 3 times the size of this one. But it does have a drain. And we'll talk more about those drains here in a bit, and we'll see more signs of them as we go over to the saltwater marsh or the brackish marsh. Okay, Kayla. Kayla's now going to show us one of the other big critters that would be hard to miss and really kind of the star of the show when it comes to animals that live in these freshwater marshes. Kayla, you want to take it away?
That sounds great. Can I ask you one more question from the audience before we go?
Oh, of course, sure.
We had a couple of questions about the trees. So just while we can still see them,
Sure.
Can you tell us anything about the trees that are growing this particular wetland?
Sure. So we have a lot of palms here. We have live oaks. When I've hiked this trail before, there's actually a trail that runs from Priest Landing to near to the J. Wolf Trail here right on campus. It's maintained by Sega Sorba, the mountain bike crew. And if you ever go down this, you'll notice quite a bit of difference of trees as you come through here. One thing I noticed more inland and more upland are pignut hickories, buckeyes, things like that. Here, like I mentioned, the wax myrtle, very common here. And unfortunately have forgotten this weed that's hanging right with all the purple flowers, and I had forgotten what it is. Kayla, can you remember we identified it the other day?
I think it might be marsh fleabane.
Nice fleabane. I think that's right. So that's one that we do see all through here. You can see, if you see kind of these brushy things that are on some of these little, so I always say almost call them islands here. That's the dog fennel, which is pretty common around here. You'll see it growing quite a bit. And but you can see some of these things if the salinity changes, you'll see dramatic differences in some of these plants and the animals that live here. And like I said, we'll talk more about it when we get to the marshland or the saltwater marsh. But that's a great question. You really can come out here with an ID book and spend all day. The freshwater is so diverse. I would think I would be here all day long identifying things. Anything else?
We had a question if there are any non-native plants that present problems in wetlands, specifically in Georgia.
Specifically in Georgia. That's a good question. I don't know my invasives as well as I have in different places here, so I'm hesitant to answer a couple of them. But I know in other places we've seen invasives like water chestnut, and I'm not sure if we see that as much here in like right next to the coast. But we've seen some different invasives. I wish I could be more knowledgeable on that, on the invasives here. But I can't, unfortunately. And right now I don't see too many. I think there are a couple. That's actually a good question. If you, I would like to answer that. So if you put your email in or something like that, or Kayla can get your information, I'll send you an email about it so I can be more informed.
Sounds great. And we can send a follow-up email with any questions that don't get answered during the program to everyone. So great question.
Yes, definitely.
I think that was most of our questions. We have a few people asking to also get the email about the invasive, so we'll be sure to send that out to everybody. Definitely a good thing to be interested in. So I think that's all for questions. So enjoy your hike through the woods, and we'll reconnect with you virtually soon.
All right, we'll see you in just a bit.
Okay, and then Isaac is going to go ahead and start a video of some of our animal ambassadors here at the aquarium. And this is a super important organism in freshwater wetlands and more generally in barrier island ecology. So go ahead and in the chat box, let us know if you know which organism this is. And I'll wait just a few moments while people enter their answers. And you can also type in the chat box some of your observations. So whether that's the animal's color, maybe different physical features that it has or its behavior. Awesome. So it looks like we're getting a lot of answers for alligator. And you are absolutely correct. This is a young American alligator. They are super important in wetlands for a number of reasons. A lot of times we think about them as predators and as being important in the food web. But one of the really important things they do is they'll dig these holes. And so those deep pools within the wetland, we call those gator holes. And during times of drought, water might dry up in other locations, but you're still typically going to have water in those deep gator holes. So that creates a really critical and important freshwater source for any animal on the island that's going to need fresh water. So that includes animals that might live in the water like fish, but it also includes, deer and other mammals or birds that are going to need some fresh water as well. And you might notice how still this one is holding. And the tank water is pretty clear, so we can see its whole body. but I don't know if you can tell that just its head is sticking out of the water. And so that's a behavior that'll help them blend in really well. So they're very well camouflaged. It's really just their eyes and nose that are above the water. So it's going to make them very effective predators. And that's one reason that you'll find wading bird nests over wetlands. So things like wood storks will actually make their nests above where there are alligators. And that might seem counterintuitive because yes, if a chick falls out of the nest, the alligator might eat it. But those eggs and those chicks from the wood storks are going to be a lot more successful when there's alligators, because the alligators are going to eat those mid-level predators, so things like raccoons or snakes, and prevent them from going up and ruining the nests of the birds. So really important in that way. If you have any questions, you can add them to the chat box, or any observations of this live alligator. Anything that you notice that might help it be really successful or thrive in a wetland habitat. And this one is, again, fairly young. It's a little over 2 years old, and was found on Skidaway Island over near Modena in a wetland there. And it might be hard to see from here, but when they blink, they have a clear membrane that helps protect their eyes, sort of like goggles when they're swimming in there. And they're mostly going to be living in freshwater. However, they will sometimes move into saltwater, brackish water wetlands in order to find food. So you might see one swimming in the salt marsh looking for things like blue crab, which, speaking of salt marsh, it looks like Luke has made his way over to the brackish water wetland. It looks like our alligator is about to go rest a little bit away from the camera. So I'm going to turn it back over to Luke, although I do see two questions in our chat box. How long do alligators live? They can exceed 60 years, so they are a fairly long-lived animal. And then they asked, why is the alligator's head coloration different than its body? And I don't know specifically about the head, but the young ones do have that striping to help them blend in and kind of break up their pattern a little bit. So I think in general, the head being a different color just sort of breaks up the silhouette of the body of the animal and helps it be better camouflaged. But with that, we're going to go ahead and turn it back over to Luke.
Thanks so much, Kayla. Those are incredible creatures. So it's fun to see those alligators around. If you ever get a chance to go to the aquarium and see those guys, you should definitely take the chance. And now we've come to our saltwater marsh, or brackish marsh, really. As you can see, the landscape is dramatically different. We have almost, I would say, like a monoculture in the understory here of both Spartina and black needle rush. And you can see kind of these mounds behind me in the background. Those are actually definitely man-made. You wouldn't find those things just kind of around here. And those mounds were used to dig out a ditch that's actually just behind that farther one. And it's called a mosquito ditch. As you might imagine, it was meant to drain this wetland to keep mosquitoes from breeding in the freshwater marsh. So now it connects right to the Skidaway River, and we're hearing some things moving around in the bush. So we're just keeping our eye out. Hopefully we won't see any of those alligators around here. I didn't see any sign earlier, so you never know. Usually they're more active in the springtime, so we'll try to kind of watch our step around here. But this as you can see, this area has been definitely impacted by the saltwater that comes in here on a tidal basis. These plants, the Spartina and the black needle rush, can live in freshwater situations, but their ability to tolerate high levels of salt is what makes them kind of dominate these areas. So here, I'm going to walk a little bit with Isaiah. And we're going to kind of show you the progression of this salt, and we're going to go actually all the way to the ditch, and we'll show exactly kind of how this water the salinity might be different here, and we might see it actually be kind of fresh, might be similar to our freshwater ponds. However, this area really gets inundated when the high tides come in. You might imagine this the salt as it's coming in from the river, especially when the river is quite salty at certain times. You'll see it affect the landscape here. This area has been, the Skidaway Island has been used, for thousands of years for human cultivation and settlement, with varying degrees of success. A lot of the farmers who farmed over here, who might have tried to grow like corn or potatoes or things like that, did not have particularly good success. The land here is quite sandy, as you might imagine, and very thin. But we'll start walking down, and we'll kind of point out some of the characteristics that gives us a clue that this is a brackish water and that's influenced by tides. Again, I'll be taking my YSI, and we'll keep an eye out for any critters that we might see that might be indicative of those saltwater marshes. So one of the things you might see through here, we're going to walk very carefully. The other day when I was actually walking through here, I made a misstep, and if you've ever made a misstep in the saltwater marsh, you know it can get very deep very quickly, both in mud and water. So I was very, very wet after the last time I made a misstep. The water here is not too bad, but we should see, when we were here the other day, we saw lots of mosquito fish. It's a bit cloudy today, maybe because of the rains. So you may not see those as much today. But those mosquito fish, again, are top predators when it comes to amphibians and other things that might want to live in here, like the insects, the salamanders. And those salamanders and frogs will mostly avoid these really, really salty areas. And you can see how big these mounds are as we go past them. There you'll see these mounds quite a bit around here. You'll see ditches that have been dug for these mosquito ditches. I mean, there's no section of this island that hasn't been touched by the human effect. We keep walking and be very careful as we do our steps. Let's see, we should start to see a few of our periwinkle snails, and actually I see a few over here. So I'll bring Isaiah over here to see some of these guys, which are some of my favorite marsh critters. I'm going right here. So these guys live on the grasses right in the tidal areas, and they have lungs, so they're not getting in the water. They don't use gills, but they actually kind of go up and down the grass, and as they algae off the grass, they leave behind the slime trail, kind of the feces, and those feces are used by the algae as fertilizer. So then it starts growing more algae, and then as the tides come in, the snail turns around and eats that algae that it just fertilized itself. So it's kind of farming up and down as it's going, riding the tides. So they're kind of the marshland's little farmers. So I always like to point those guys out. Let's see, as we get closer here to the main channel, we can see how this landscape has been impacted. Both, I mean, and I wouldn't say in totally negative ways. In order to have people living here, we are going to clear some of these areas, but it can really impact the wetlands here. So now I'm going to get up my YSI and check out and see what our salinity is now. Okay, I'm going to drop it in, and we'll see here. So, if you want to come a little closer, you can see here, there's our salinity, parts per thousand. It's kind of jumping in between about 6.5, kind of jumping around a bit, but about 6.6. So it's another part per thousand more salty than our freshwater wetland has been. And sometimes we actually find these to be very similar on the low end of salinity. But as tide comes in, and low tide today was at about 9 o'clock at Isle of Hope nearby, we'll see, we'll sometimes see it be fresher at certain times of the day and certain times of the year. So I was actually expecting this to be a little bit fresher today, but the salt definitely has an impact through here. And one of the things I also want to mention is that really the freshwater, because it is less dense than the saltwater that we have out here, it tends to kind of float on top of the saltwater that might be underneath, creating what's called a freshwater lens. Kayla, can you bring that slide up too?
Yes, one moment.
Sure.
It should be up now where people can see it.
Fantastic. So you can actually see how freshwater lenses work in some of these wetlands on an island. The saltwater going underneath the freshwater lens kind of sitting on top of that saltwater because it is it's so much less dense. Imagine oil floating on top of water. The freshwater floats on top of the saltwater, and this keeps this freshwater habitat around. But we can see how those freshwater habitats might disappear, say, if sea level rise brings in more saltwater, or as wave action comes over from big hurricanes. That might really influence this habitat, really destroy it for all the animals and plants that make it home. If you have ever get a chance to go to Savannah National Wildlife Refuge, actually just in South Carolina off the Savannah River, you've seen probably some of the gates and channels they have there to regulate their saltwater and freshwater. It's supposed to be mainly a freshwater wetland habitat. So you'll see, every time you go there, you'll see tons of gators, shorebirds, lots of diverse plants and wildlife there. But as sea level rise comes up the Savannah River, we see saltier and saltier water going farther and farther up. They're really having to combat saltwater intrusion in their landscape, and as they kind of fight it all the time, trying to make sure they preserve that kind of habitat. So sometimes people think that the freshwater marsh is kind of migrating inland a bit as sea level rises. Here, so we've talked a little bit about how these wetlands are so close. You can imagine that they do influence each other. We are right next, this saltwater and brackish area is definitely, right next door to our freshwater wetland. So we really want to, it'd be great to be able to monitor this kind of area, see how it changes over time. I'd like to see how that freshwater marsh changes as this marsh possibly expands, as the saltwater marsh possibly expands. I also wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what's one of the things that our salinity and looking at the dissolved oxygen and pH, these water chemistry metrics that we use to kind of keep an eye on the health of our wetlands up and down the coast. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I'll definitely have my contact info, and we can start doing virtual trainings, which we're actually doing starting next week. Start doing our virtual trainings to do that pretty soon. And then we'll have a kind of in-person, socially distanced, outside the demonstrations to show you exactly how we go about doing these kind of things. So we'll talk about that whenever you want to. Another thing I want to talk about is just how we protect these areas. They are human influenced, and there's not too many pristine areas anymore on the coast. That it feels like it sometimes when you're out here, it definitely feels like a version of Jurassic Park, but it's definitely influenced by human impacts, both locally, regionally, and globally. So if we do have regulations that protect these areas. The Georgia Coastal Marshlands Protection Act does provide some protection for these areas, but it really takes an investment from the community to get these kind of things activated. So we want to make sure that our coastal stewards are out there keeping an eye on things and letting our leaders know and our scientists know and everybody we can that these places deserve to be protected, and they are precious areas. Let's see, and I think that's for the most part what I have to talk about here. I want to talk about a little bit more about the urgency of protecting our wetlands. Actually, we have a quiz question that kind of touches on this and sees how much you might know about this. Caleb, would you mind bringing up that question about how much wetlands we lose in 48 states over the course of a year?
Yes, absolutely. So thanks, Luke. The quiz should be up now, and you'll see it's a box with the green bar at the top. And the question is, how many acres of wetlands are lost each year in the lower 48 states? 5,000, 20,000, 80,000, 200,000, or 500,000. So this is every year.
Yeah,
and we'll give people just a few more minutes to get your answers in. Again, no worries if you don't know the right answer. It's just for fun. You aren't being graded on it. I do see most folks have voted, but we'll leave it open for just a few more seconds. And we do have answers for responses for all of our answer options so far.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like most people have voted. If not, this is your last 1 second warning that it's going to close, and we are ending the poll and sharing results. So one person thought 5,000, one person thought 20,000, 2 for 80,000, 6, that was our highest response, for 200,000, and 4 for 500,000 acres.
Well, I guess, I don't know if I'm happy to report it, but it is a little bit less than what the majority thought. It's 80,000 acres per year. It's about 7 football fields an hour we lose freshwater of wetlands in the lower 48. So yeah, I'm glad it's not 200,000. Definitely glad it's not 500,000. Those, it's hard to fathom losing that much of these habitats at any rate, but they come under pressure from a lot of different sources. Agriculture, development require land and water to happen. So that water uptake, we've definitely seen a lot of changes to our aquifer on those kind of fronts. Because as more and more people see the beauty of the Georgia coast, we see a lot more land that we never thought was developable become that way, becoming drained. Again, there's always been this thought, been a thought for this long time, that wetlands are kind of wasted land. They don't have a purpose really other than mosquito breeding habitat, but they provide really critical services to our communities. And it's really important that they are protected and preserved for generations, because the other future generations may rely on them for flood control, for oyster roasts, for low country boils. If you want to protect those parts of like southern coastal culture, you'll need to protect the wetlands that make that kind of thing available and possible. So with that, I think I'll wrap up here. I want to go in a positive note that these places are here to be visited. There are trails here on our campus. We have you should definitely come out and check these places out. Whether you come with an escort or by yourself, visiting these places is the best way to connect with them. So I really encourage everybody to come out and see these areas for yourself. If you're an avid birder, I would hope you take advantage of these kind of areas, because there's you can chalk up a life list very quickly in these kind of places. And then if you're ever interested in becoming a adopted wetland volunteer, kind of protection too, definitely touch. I'll be more to help you. Thanks so much, Kayla.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Luke, for that virtual tour of the wetlands. And I think your sound started to break up a little bit there at the end, but I think you were letting folks know that if they're interested in becoming an Adopt a Wetland volunteer, that we can be sending that information out afterwards as well.
Yes.
Do we have time? Are you okay if we ask you a few questions from the audience?
Of course.
Okay. So the first one had to do with the mosquito ditches that you showed us and all those mounds from the mosquito ditches. We had a question of why haven't the mosquito ditches been filled in to better restore function of the wetlands?
That's an excellent question. And that's actually something we've been talking about in the past weeks, looking for grants for that kind of a thing. I think really that you can see that these mounds are not small. We would have to get in some like heavy equipment to fill these kind of things in. So we have to kind of balance the damage that we might do to these areas with the restoration. So it's definitely something that I would like to do sooner rather than later. It's just a matter of getting those kind of permits, getting the workforce, getting the money to do it. So that's something that we were always looking at. We love to see more restored wetlands. I think it's always better to protect the ones you have too. That's one thing to keep in mind. Protection of intact wetlands, I think is very, very important. Intact wetlands are much more productive. The wetlands, one thing I forgot to mention earlier, the wetlands are the most productive ecosystem on Earth, even more, quite a bit more productive than the rainforest. Like the Amazonian rainforest, you think of it as, full of life and so diverse. And these wetlands here are put out much more productivity. They put out a lot more life than you think. And especially you think about wetlands, though, you don't think about just the coast. You think about all your freshwater wetlands. There's a lot of them in Canada that are extremely productive. So protecting the ones we have is probably the first step in that. And then these restored wetlands work very well also. But research has shown that they're not quite as productive as the ones we already have that are established. So we need to kind of think about that when we're out here protecting the ones we have first. It's so much better to act with prevention and cheaper in the long run than trying to restore something that's been destroyed. So we want to try to focus on those kind of things.
Thanks, Luke. That was a great answer. Very informative. We had another question, which is, what are some of the best times of the day to visit the marsh?
That's a great question too. I would say coming here like dawn or dusk, especially is a great time to catch the bird.
Luke's video might have frozen. Okay, well, it looks like Luke might be frozen on his end, which they are in the field with a hotspot. So in the meantime, while we're waiting for Luke to come back, I think he was starting to mention that dawn and dusk are great times to see birds. I would add that if you're coming at dawn or dusk, just be aware that those are times that alligators are active as well. So just be mindful walking near the edge of the water and to be appreciative, but also respectful of their adaptations as a predator. And I do think we have Luke back.
Hey, sorry. And right here in this marshland, we can get disconnected sometimes. And yes, Kayla, I was exactly saying that. Be careful. Springtime and those dawn and dusk feeding times. And alligators are one of those people who are one of those critters that are out there pretty active at those times. So yeah, I would echo exactly. I don't want to cut that part out of what I was saying. Be cognizant of alligator action, especially in the springtime. Are there any other questions that you have?
We had a question about what you were talking about with wetlands being the most productive habitat. What does it mean for something to be productive?
Sure, that's a great question. To kind of elaborate on that, it's the amount of kind of carbon that's produced by all the grasses. So we're seeing a lot of its primary production is what they're putting out. So a lot of the grasses are incorporating carbon into the ground. But I would point to that's kind of what's happening here on the coastal wetlands. But around the world, wetlands are being more productive, kind of like establishing that first the first chain in the food web. It's like they're producing a lot of the grasses that are able to be eaten by vegetation that are able to be eaten by insects, and then insects, amphibians, the next step in the food chain, and then producing from there. So they produce just an amazing amount of energy that's utilized by the area, by the surrounding communities. So when I say production, and saltwater, I should say saltwater marsh is actually, I think, more productive, definitely more productive than rainforest. I mean, when you think about it, there's a lot more wetland out there than there is rainforest, and just to think about kind of like acreage. But the freshwater wetlands are just as productive as the rainforest. So yeah, that's kind of what they're establishing that first step in the food chain, and they just put out so much energy in that way, more than you'd expect out of a rainforest. That's a great question, though.
Thanks, Luke. We also had a question about, can you describe the paths to use from the main part of the campus to reach these areas?
Sure. So like I said, the easiest place to go to see freshwater wetlands is going up to what's called an area called Priest Landing. And that has trails right next to it, very easy access. And that's when it's just down the road off OSCA Road, OSCA Road, not too far from here. And if you come to this marsh, it's off an access road, about 3/4 of a mile down an access road in the middle of the marsh here. If I don't know if you've maybe seen me look off to my right here, but there's the mountain bike trails actually are 30 yards from us right now. So if you were coming by, these are multi-use trails though. So if you were to hike down this trail, that comes in off of the J. Wolf Trail, that you can kind of enter from the J. Wolf Trail right from our aquarium, and then kind of take a side route off through here. And this route, these trails will take you all the way across McWhorter Drive, all the way to Priest Landing, if you were to follow it right to the end. So if you are looking for guidance or anything like that, be sure to just let us know. They are maintained by the Sega Sorba, the mountain bike group. So they're old bridges over a lot of these ditches, but it's an incredible hike to check out.
Fantastic. Thanks, Luke. And I think we have about 1 minute left for questions. So if there's any last questions that people have, you can add those to the chat box now. And I did want to mention that I put into the chat box a link to a Qualtrics evaluation. It only takes about a minute to fill out, and that really helps us to be able to continue to improve programming. So if you have a minute to fill that out, we really appreciate it. That chat box will disappear when we end the meeting. So I would go ahead and click on it now or copy and paste into a browser window just so that you have it afterwards. And I'll give it just a few more seconds in case anyone else has last questions. And if you're interested in learning more about other habitats, other organisms, I would encourage you to check out our event calendar for the fall. This is the first one of the season, but we will be offering programs all the way through November. And all of that can be found on our website as well.
And I want to thank you all for joining us today. It's as you might see from me, it's a little bit muggy out today, but it's definitely well worth it to check these areas out. And I'm so glad I could have company along the way. So thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Luke. It was a great trip through the wetlands. And sorry, one moment. I just wanted to share some last information because I know that we had a number of people in the chat that were interested about volunteering maybe with Adopt a Wetland or finding out more about how they can get involved. So just a few ways that you can get involved. One is by becoming a friend and supporting this work. For instance, the Friends donations helped us buy that hotspot and the stabilizing device that we're using to film Luke in the wetlands right now. Mm-hmm. So thank you to friends who are on the call right now. And then if you're interested in volunteering or coming to other events, you can connect with us. This slide here has our website, gacoast.uga.edu. And you can also follow us on social media platforms as well, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. Awesome. Well, thank you all and have a fantastic weekend. See you next time.